Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Continuing the interview of Luang Por Sumedho with Roger Wheeler, and this is part 5. So once again, Roger Wheeler is an American who was ordained in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and this interview took place at the Insight Meditation Society in Massachusetts in May of 1981. So it was 40 years ago. And in the previous section, one of the things that Luang Por had mentioned was that when he was first taking up the role of abbot and leading and being in the position of teaching, that he had to deal from time to time with feelings of inadequacy. So where we begin today is with Roger Wheeler asking, how did you meditate on this inadequacy that you felt? How did you confront that? Luang Por responds, I just watched. I just brought up and listened to the complaining, whining conditions of my mind that kept nagging, I'm not ready. Roger responds, again, during this morning's meditation, anger and resentment were arising. This time, I just let it come, watched it, looked at it arising and passing, without identifying with it, without getting caught up in it. And it went, and it'll surely come back again. Is that all the practice is? A continuous, steady, constant watching of the arising and passing away of phenomena? Luang Por responds, yes, it's just awareness. And then after some time, these hindrances will just peter out, dissolve? Right. If one doesn't act on it, the habit will just fade away. And then Roger says, but even though one does not act on it, because the propensity or tendency for a particular mental disturbance to arise is present, is action not being created from that? Luang Por responds by saying, one cannot help the conditions that are present which make that delusion arise in one's mind. One of two actions may follow. Either one reacts to it by getting caught up in the action, or one represses it. If one tends to repress the unpleasant, listen to the guilt or self-hatred, bring up the mood. Oh, I'm hopeless, stupid, I can't do anything right, I'm wasting my life. Just listen to it. Keep bringing it up and listening to it. One sees it by skillfully bringing it up and looking at it, and it goes away. Otherwise, one tends just to repress it. So in this, then Luang Por's talking very much about these two tendencies of mind, the getting caught up, the bhava tanha, so in the different emotions as he's describing, what Roger was mentioning, saying anger and resentment were arising. Then Luang Por is saying, yeah, if you get caught up in it and indulge in it, that's one extreme, and then the other is the vibhava tanha, the annihilationist tendency of pushing things away and repressing. So then he goes on to say, if one tends to repress the unpleasant, then listen to the guilt or self-hatred. Bring up the mood. I'm hopeless, I'm stupid, I can't do anything right, I'm wasting my life. Just listen to it. Keep bringing it up and listening to it. One sees it by skillfully bringing it up and looking at it, and then it goes away. Otherwise, one tends just to repress it. So this is a meditation method that Luang Por Sumedho would often speak about, thinking the unthinkable, is one way of putting it, so that in using this, it's important not to get carried away with it, but as I remember, Luang Por used to instruct us in how to think consciously. And so one of the helpful first steps before you start doing it with emotionally loaded states is just to take a simple practical statement like, today is Sunday. or this month is January, a really sort of non-personal, emotionally unloaded statement. So and this is really just developing the skill of how to think consciously, how to be aware of thinking. So that's a sort of an initial skill that's helpful to develop. So just let the mind be as quiet as possible, and then think, this month is January. And if that's not emotionally loaded in your own particular life story, oh no, not January. No, please don't say that. So whatever is as bland and simple as possible. Today is Sunday, or so that you're noticing the silence before the thought. You're thinking the thought consciously. You're aware of the thinking process, and then you're aware of the thinking coming to an end. This month is January. You can see it arising, taking shape, and ending. So a little exercise like that helps us to be able to think without getting lost in thought. And you can also see the space around the thought, the space within it, the sort of transparency of thought, so that you become skilled at just being able to think without getting absorbed into the content of the conceptual thought. So once you've developed a little bit of skill with that, then it's you go on to sort of part 2, which is then using the quality of mindfulness to catch what are the usual or the afflictive messages of the mind. If you're very jealous of somebody, or you're very critical about somebody, or you're very self-critical, and so Luang Por is using that here, that sense of self-judgment. I'm hopeless, stupid. I can't do anything right. I'm wasting my life. And so, in that kind of a process, rather than just launching a sort of a kind of a speech of self-criticism, in exactly the same way, bring the mind to silence, make it as quiet as possible, then bring up that thought: I'm hopeless. I am stupid. I can't do anything right. Watch the space before, think the thought, and then watch the space after. Get to know that as a voice. Let yourself think that. Also, if you are judging other people, that person is terrible, that person is wonderful, they are the best person in the world. I wish I was like them. If I was like them, I would be happy. Yeah, and it's so that you're clarifying the judgments that the mind makes and seeing them in a context. And in this way, you're not having to tell yourself, "Oh, that's only part of the story," or that's just a passing impression," or "You're not the worst person in the world. Don't be ridiculous." You don't have to say those kind of encouraging things, because but the very process of looking and feeling, knowing those patterns of thinking, it reveals how partial, incomplete, and dependent those kind of judgments are. It's just your own intuitive wisdom reveals that. So I have found that an extremely powerful and helpful approach to practice. So it also goes against the habit of repressing, of being afraid to think those thoughts. And Luang Por would often call it the sort of thinking the unthinkable, because if it's things impulses that you have that are against the precepts, say you're really annoyed with someone, and that you think, "I wish you were dead. If he was dead, I would be happy. That would be a good thing." And often when you do this, it's really unskillful in terms of the content, and you wouldn't say it out loud. But often when you give voice to those kind of impulses, or those sort of inappropriate or violent, selfish, greedy impulses, then you can't get to the end of the sentence before it sort of falls apart. It loses its strength because it's so ridiculous, and you realize it's just a sort of instinctual, childlike, impulsive attitudes of mind that really have no value and no substance, and so they don't. There's no need to be afraid of them or to suppress them or to create more self-hatred on account of them. So it's a mysterious thing, but by, in a way, highlighting them, getting them sort of front center and sort of shining the lamps on them, they lose their power by being seen clearly. It's like when all the lights are on, you can see where everything is. If the lights are dim, the imagination works very, very strongly. Anyway, so to continue. Then Roger speaks. Even though the delusion or emotion isn't arising at the time, because one knows that it's a predominant condition which causes one continuous agitation, does, quote, bringing it up, unquote, simply mean letting it arise? Luang Por responds, I would even go and seek it. About 7 or 8 years ago, I had a problem of jealousy. So that would have been around 74, 75. I hated the jealousy. I had the insight that jealousy was a problem, so I tended to try to annihilate it. When the condition arose, I would think, oh God, here it is. I've got to try and deal with this. Now what do I do? Well, one is supposed to have mudita for those of whom one is jealous. So I would think, I'm really happy for so-and-so. I'm really happy he's so successful. But I didn't mean a word of it. I think when in the early days of Wat Nanachat, there was I'm not sure. Again, you have to wait till Luang Por gets here. Add this to the list of things to ask Luang Por when he arrives. But I think there was things like there was one of the Western monks who could chant the whole Patimokkha without making any mistakes at all. Venerable Varapanyo, and he actually he was so good at it, he used to make mistakes on purpose just to check that the checker was paying attention. He would deliberately throw in mistakes to make sure his checker was awake. So he was that confident, if not overconfident. But but anyway, and it was in those early days of the Western Sangha at Wat Nanachat then, and perhaps it was other situations too, but those kind of things, as I recall comments Luang Por had made in the past, that he could feel quite jealous that he was no longer the best Patimokkha chanter, that there was something that he was quite happy to be very accomplished in that role. I'm really happy for so-and-so, I'm really happy he's successful, but I did not mean a word of it. I was just lying through my teeth. It was not solving the problem. I would repress it, annihilate it, and it would always come back, bashing back at me. Finally, I realized that the problem was not with the jealousy, but with my aversion to it. I just hated myself for having it. I felt I should not have that condition. I was ashamed of it. When I had that insight, I started being jealous of everything. I started bringing jealousy up, thinking of everything that made me feel jealous. I kept looking at it. After doing that for some time, the problem was no longer there. So in exactly this kind of way, in a way, you learn to let go of a particular quality by amplifying it, by, in a way, as they say in English, giving it enough rope to hang itself. It's a bit of a strange expression, but when somebody is asking for something, you give them more than what they're asking for, and then they end up making a problem out of it. So give him enough rope, and he'll to hang himself, so that it's you're giving that emotion a lot of space, a lot of strength, a lot of validation, and because of that, it falls apart. It can't hold up. It's only when it's sort of in a blurry state. It's just off at the edges, and you're not fully conscious of it. Then it has a lot of power. When you get it front center and say, "Okay, speak to me, tell me." Yeah, well, yeah, and then you start making a list of all the things that you're jealous of, or that you're angry about, or that you're desirous for. And then, in a mysterious way, that tends to deflate it. I remember Luang Por Chah had a particular, a very, very similar practice, and it's probably the kind of a source for Luang Por Sumedho developing it, was Ajahn Chah said, if you have a lot of anger and it's very difficult to let go of, then instead of doing mindfulness of breathing, practice mindfulness of anger. So you sit down and compose your mind and deliberately bring up the feeling of anger and stay angry for an hour. And as soon as you stop feeling angry, you got to bring your mind back and get angry again. And so that just as if it was with mindfulness of breathing, if your mind, your attention drifts off the breath and you notice, oh, I'm not paying attention to the breath, you deliberately notice that and come back to the breath again. You do that with a feeling of anger. And it's really hard to do. So I tried it on one occasion, and it's absolutely exhausting, trying to stay angry for a whole hour. And the result of it was, like, at the end of that, or in a way, the aversive tendencies seem to be really played out and exhausted. And so that you're not getting up and looking around and sort of yelling at people or getting angry externally, but internally trying to arouse the feeling and stay in that agitated state. It's really hard to do, I found, and Luang Por Chah would recommend that. And then by sort of overfeeding it, then the appetite for that goes away. It's just like eating too much of your favorite thing. When you're really stuffed with your favorite thing, I can't look at another one. I'm totally bloated with too much of that good thing, and then it becomes off-putting. As it says at the beginning of 12th night, if music be the food of love, play on, so that, surfeiting, the appetite may sicken and so die. So somewhat old-fashioned English, but if music is the food of love, play on. He's talking to the orchestra. Please, because the Duke, I think Duke Orsino was his name. He's fallen in love with someone and is suffering a lot because of being in love with this person. So he said, "Please play on. If music is the food of love, play on. So that if the music is the food for this, then more of it, please, so that I'll get sick and overfed with it, and then the appetite will sicken and so die." Then Luang Por continues, "Lust is something that we have greed for. It's something that we enjoy. One does not have to keep bringing up lust to look at it, because one will get lost in it. It's too easy to absorb into lust. However, emotions like anger and jealousy are a nasty kind of experience for me. I simply don't like them and don't want them. So instead of pushing them away, I had to bring them to me, so I could just see them. I deliberately thought of past experiences with jealousy. I brought up all the memories that particular problem caused. I didn't analyze it and try to figure out why, but simply looked at its impermanent nature. This movement towards it neutralized the habit I developed of pushing it away. Then there was no more problem. That's why wisdom, panya, is necessary. When one understands the movements of attraction and aversion, one really knows how to practice. Finding the balance between drawing near and pushing away comes from trusting the wisdom in the heart. I'm just giving a guide to consider using. See if it works." Any questions, comments? Have we got the microphones? Yes, we have. Any comments, questions? Yes, Roman.
Ajahn, I consider this a serendipity that you're bringing up, or the text brings up asubha, or aversion to lust. And I was just wondering, it's maybe not 100% related, but it came up today, and I wonder, in Buddhist countries, why do not more pathologists and surgeons who are at least superficially acquainted with the three characteristics gain insight having to do with dead bodies and cut up bodies and dissected bodies all day, and a monk or a nun in access concentration can just visualize it and sometimes gain absorption just by thinking of it, and they have to do it with it on a daily basis.
Good question. I grew up on a farm, and when I was very small, so we had chickens, and my mother was a very compassionate person, so she never wanted to kill anything on the farm. So my dad did all the killing that needed to be done for the animals when they were killing them for the market or whatever. And anyway, so from time to time they would be gutting a chicken, and so then I was very aware of what's inside a chicken. As a sort of, my father would have killed the chicken. My mother was sort of taking its guts out on the kitchen table. And of course, as a small child, you're sort of fascinated by that. And then I'd say, are we like that on the inside as well? And, oh yes, we're just not exactly, we're the same on the inside. And, ooh. And then I said, oh, that's really disgusting. And then I forget, I was only about 3 or 4 years old, but I do remember then, as the conversation developed, I said, so if we look like that on the inside, why do doctors ever get married? And somehow I put 2 and 2 together, that if doctors are aware that's what we look like on the inside, why do doctors ever get married? Because they're seeing what the insides are like, then of course they'd never be attracted to anybody. And then I forget what my mother said, but they find a way. And I think, to answer your question, I think the way that they find, and I don't know if anyone here is a doctor or medical students, but what happens in medical training is that there's a kind of a sort of distancing from the internal organs of the body. And so that when people are doing anatomy, there's a sort of playful, jokey, and almost sort of like a off-putting or inappropriate relationship to the internal organs. It's sort of not really relating to that body on the slab as anything, is in a way is connected with you, or that you're like that, but rather you're having this sort of jokey, playful relationship or attitude towards the cadavers that you're dissecting. And so there's like almost a deliberate distancing from that it's other, and you don't relate it to this is what my body and my life is like. And so as I understand it, that is a way of helping medical students to do the work they need to do and be sort of close up and have their hands in all of the kind of literally blood and guts of a human body, and not be identified with it, to treat it in an objective way. So there's like a deliberate objectifying of the insides of a human body as something other. They don't relate to it in their own as a sort of. There's not a quality of empathy so much. It might be very, very different nowadays, but certainly that used to be the case in medical training. And so that, and I think that has its effect, that sort of deliberate distancing. It makes working on bodies, and you're not saying to yourself, "Oh, that's just like me. That's just exactly the same as what's going on in my body and in all the other bodies of my friends here in the lab and that I'm working with and in my family." It's put into a different framework. And so I think that's, if I'm understanding your question correctly, that's very different than a Buddhist meditator who is deliberately relating to the inside of a body or reflecting or contemplating the insides of bodies to make the framework that is exactly like me. I am exactly like that. There's no difference between me and that. So it's like steering the attention and developing the reflection in a very, very different way. Does that make sense?
Yes, but it seems to be a strong case of cognitive dissonance, because usually medical students are quite smart, and there must be, like you said, a deliberate effort to not connect the dots, although it's kind of obvious.
Yeah, it's well, I think that's where your intelligence makes a good excuse for how you can put it into a neatly sealed box and put it over there. It's interesting that I read a very beautiful account of someone who worked in a pathology lab as a helper. They weren't like a doctor. They were more like a sort of a lab assistant. And it was, I forget where I read it. It was when I was living in America. And she gave this description about how it was upsetting to her how the pathologists and the doctors related in such a distant way to the cadavers, the bodies that they were having to cut up and they were researching. And so, and in this article that she wrote, it was how she would often go into the laboratory after the work was over, and sort of pay her respects to all of the bodies sort of lying out on the slabs or put into the fridges, and treating all the body parts with a very studied respect, and and looking at the name on the name tags and talking to the addressing the body with the person's name, which the doctors definitely were not doing, and the people doing the dissections, because. And maybe it was because that person, they were more of a sort of a side worker. They were a lab assistant, a sort of a cleaner, a tidier. It was just part of their job, and they could relate to it more naturally on a human level. But that's one of the ways that our intelligence sometimes can be a barrier. That you can think your way to creating a beautiful, seamless edifice, of a conceptual edifice that frames things in a way that is intellectually tidy, but it's also shutting down your own human feelings, and so that sometimes not having such a sort of heavily developed intellectual side, but much more of a sort of natural human side, where you're sort of closer to the empathetic quality, is that's an advantage. I mean, having being bright, having a lot of intelligence can usually be very helpful, but in those kind of instances, it can be an obstacle. There's a very powerful play called Wit, about an English professor who has terminal cancer, and the doctors who are treating her. It was written by a woman called Margaret Edson. She won a Pulitzer Prize for it. She was a primary school teacher. It was the only thing she ever wrote. She won a Pulitzer Prize for this play, and it's really very moving. But the doctors only relate to her as an interesting sort of experimental subject. And then she develops this relationship with the nurse on the ward, who sort of refuses to see her just as an experimental subject. They're trying out this new treatment on her. And there's a film was made of it with Emma Thompson, who does an incredible job. It's very moving, and as a death contemplation, it's well worth watching. There's this moment and she does a lot of talking to the camera, a lot of monologues. The heroine of the story, and she says, "So I was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. There is no stage 5." And you have to stay with her through our whole death process. But it's the nurse on the ward who it becomes her real support, and refuses just to see her as an interesting experimental subject, and to just looking at the statistics of the numbers coming up of how the medication is working and not working, and we'll just keep seeing her as a human being, a companion in this life together. It's called Wit. In the original play, instead of an I, it's got a semicolon instead of the letter I in the word wit. But I won't go into details of why it has that. But I think it's a challenge, and the contemplations on the body, they are deliberately designed to go against those instinctual sort of pushing away and not wanting to think about what's on the inside or the fragility of life, and that it takes an active contemplation to see things in that way. Please, Ajahn Chandasiri. Yeah.
I was just remembering a funny incident.
Yes.
When I was on Tudong with Sister Brahmawara, who had been a doctor, and at one point we had to stop and find something in the bottom of our rucksacks. Beside the road, we were getting something out. I forget what it was, a piece of string or something. And as we were in the middle of doing this, she said, "This is like abdominal surgery," which I found very interesting remark in terms of just what happens when people are having to work inside your body.
Mm-hmm.
Just a sort of sense of feeling around for something.
It must be in here somewhere. Yes. So any other questions? Yes, Ajahn Kachana.
Yeah, one more thing just to note is, it's not everyone can do that cognitive dissonance. My sister went through 4 years of medical school, and I think the first time she saw a cadaver, she nearly fainted. And I believe the similar things happened maybe 24 more times. It was very trying for her. She's not a doctor now. But so there's some people who just, I guess for her, it was just too visceral, couldn't do it. Mm-hmm. And didn't work.
Yeah, well, in a way, that's a good thing. You find a different way of working. But in terms of using this kind of practice, as Luang Por points out, this doesn't work very well with lust, because whereas it's hard to maintain anger for an hour, maintaining sexual fantasies for an hour is quite easy for many, many people. It's not difficult to do because it's attractive and exciting, and so that the mind can easily get lost in that kind of domain. And so these what Roman was asking about in terms of reflecting on the inner parts of the body is one approach. Another that I like to recommend is looking at animals, and particularly insects or spiders and such like lobsters and to contemplate how that to another spider this particular being is extremely attractive. Certain spiders they will die in the process of trying to mate with their partner that they're attracted to, and that and how as a human being you cannot find that particular form attractive or exciting, but for a being of its own species that is compelling to the point of death, you'd risk your life in order to be able to mate with that particular form. And so that then that is I feel is a very I've found it's a very skillful way of relating to that. That whereas the mind can be drawn to particular human forms and say that was very interesting, very attractive, very very delightful. To reflect, well, if I was a spider, would that would that person be attractive? Well, no, Or if I was a praying mantis, or if I was a blackbird, or if I was a squirrel. Would a human being be interesting or attractive? Like, well, no, it wouldn't. The chemistry wouldn't be there. So it's ways of sort of reframing the perception. That's one of the helpful things. And so that if you're using this kind of a contemplation to see if you can bring into your mind something like an octopus or a lobster or a spider, and that how could that be attractive, and is there a way that could be sexually appealing, and the mind just draws a complete blank that, well, no, of course not, it's impossible. And so in that moment the mind is seeing that the usual objects of desire, they are dependent, they're conditioned because of our human birth. And the conditioning of our senses, it makes that particular form, or those particular sounds or shapes or smells and such like, it makes that compelling or interesting or attractive. But it's not attractive in and of itself, like with if music be the food of love, play on. That if it depends upon the chemistry of that particular attraction, or just with food itself. If you're ill and you're feeling nauseous, the idea of having any food can be really off-putting. Like, oh, so if someone's unwell, say, are you, you've been unwell. Are you going for the meal today? And they say, oh no. Yeah. And so food that normally would be very attractive and interesting, and you go, oh, look, they've made such and such today. And there's that kind of spark of interest and excitement in the mind. If you're ill, you're nauseous, it's like, oof, even the thought of it, let alone the smell or the sight, is really off-putting. Those are important investigations into lust and the desire process. The attraction is not in the object. It's in your mind. It's not there, it's here. And if the chemistry isn't right, then the attraction isn't there. And so these kind of reflections that help see in a way, see the conditioned and partial, the dependent nature of attraction and aversion, just like Luang Por is talking about with jealousy in this respect, that it needs a certain setup for the chemistry to work. If you tweak the setup, the chemistry doesn't work anymore. And so these kind of reflections and ways of exploring are ways of tweaking the setup, changing the framework for it. And in that changing of the framework and sort of using a different point of view, then it in a way it spoils the trick. It's like seeing how the conjurer, how the magician is doing the trick. It spoils the trick if you can see, oh, there's actually a pigeon up the conjurer's sleeve, or there's you can see something moving under the table that before the conjurer appears, conjures up a dog or a cat or whatever. So to continue. So then at this point, Roger changes the subject. How do your monks relate to you? Is it a similar type of relationship to what you had with Ajahn Chah? Luang Por responds, the monks who are now with me are quite respectful. They're a very good Sangha. On occasion I've had monks who gave me difficulties, but one learns from that also. Difficult monks who don't like or respect one can teach one an awful lot. They cause friction. Roger asks, but could that not cause problems in the Sangha? Well, we learn to deal with problems rather than creating ideal environments. Roger then asks, how would you advise one of your monks if he had qualms about following certain precepts? For example, if one of the monks felt it would be better to don layman's clothes instead of wearing the robes when going into London. Luang Por responds, we would never wear lay clothes. So Roger replies, oh, then no advice is necessary. Luang Por goes on, it's unthinkable, but generally it's a very individual thing. One has to take many things into account. However, the whole point is to get the monk to know his intention, to know what he's doing, rather than forcing, compelling, or conditioning people. We are just using these particular customs and traditions as a standard of reflection, as a way of looking at ourselves. It's not a matter of making everybody obey the rules, but of trying to arouse honor in a person, so that he's responsible for his conduct in the community and in the world. One can make people obey rules out of fear, afraid to break them because they will be caught, chastised, and humiliated, but that isn't arousing integrity and honor in a person. On the other hand, one doesn't want laxity either, letting everyone just do what they want. One wants a kind of strictness, an impeccable standard from which one can learn. Otherwise, people tend to think, oh well, the robes don't make any difference. Oh well, eating in the afternoon is okay. Oh well, carrying money is all right. One can rationalize anything. There are good reasons for breaking all the rules, as far as I can see. What if a family next door is starving to death? Why should I not be able to steal a loaf of bread from a rich person to give it to them? There's always a good reason for an action. So it's not rationalizing that we try to develop, but the sense of honor and wisdom. That cannot be done by conditioning people through fear, binding them to a set of rules which are so inflexible and rigid that they just become rats in a maze. then Roger responds, I used to think that Theravada monks interpreted the vows very literally, but when I observe you and Bhikkhu Sujito, I see that the Vinaya can be used as a lesson in the development of mindfulness. That is all it is. And Paul responds, right, it's really quite a good vehicle. But as you mentioned, precepts can become a neurotic discipline. Right. Luang Por responds, at first it has to be like an exercise. One trains oneself. When one learns to play the piano, it's not possible to start with variations on themes. First, one must learn the themes. In the beginning, one needs to develop skill and become coordinated. One has to do repetitive things, like practicing for hours until one acquires the skill. One can then play the standard themes simply by imitation. Eventually, as skill increases, one doesn't have to imitate anymore. Playing becomes natural. Then one can play the variations and the music becomes a joy to listen to. But if one tries to play variations before one knows the theme, the result can be very unpleasant for everybody. That's why the Vinaya discipline is like piano exercises. The first few years are boring. One has to listen to the rules over and over. Everything has to be done in a certain way. But although this looks a bit fussy and irrelevant to anything grand, once one learns how to do it, one doesn't have to think about it. Just as in piano playing, one doesn't have to wonder which key to press. It's automatic. One already has the skill with that particular instrument. From that point on, one is free. One can use the instrument. Like piano players, some monks just play the standard theme over and over because they're afraid to let go of the standard. They're not confident. They lack wisdom. They have only conditioned themselves. The point of the Vinaya is not to condition, but to give complete freedom. Not freedom to follow desire, but freedom to be spontaneous. This can only be done through wisdom, not through desire. One cannot be spontaneous with desire. One just becomes overwhelmed by it. The Vinaya is a way of training body and speech, of giving them beauty and form, and establishing relationships with others. So again, Luang Por is underscoring this skillful relationship to form and discipline, and many those of you who've been listening to these readings for the last few days will know that Roger Wheeler's asked this questions around this area many times, and Luang Por once again is underscoring that it's not just a matter of obeying a form or following a system in an automatic way, or that as if the form itself would be intrinsically liberating, but rather it's the skillful use of it, and also that just forcing people to obey just by frightening them or intimidating them or shaming them, that's not a liberating process. It does produce a kind of neurotic anxiety and fear of breaking the rules, but it's really a development of an attitude of being sincere, as he says, that you do want to have a kind of strictness, an impeccable standard. Yes, and that's why we have these Vinaya readings and going through the rules and the etiquette over and over and over again. So it's really clear what should be done, what shouldn't be done. But the point is of that is not to just be able to replicate the precepts and the rules and to say imitate the behavior, but the point is to be able to free the heart. And he doesn't mention it here, but in a teaching, a Dhamma talk he gave in this same kind of era, the early 80s, then Luang Por, he used this example of being locked in a prison cell, and then the Buddha comes along and says, "Here's the key. With this key, you can get out of your prison cell." And you think, "Oh, so thank you so much. This is so helpful. I'm so happy. Yeah, this is the most wonderful thing." And then you take the key that the Buddha's given you and you put it up on the wall and you bow to it and say, "Oh, thank you. This is so wonderful. This is the key that releases me from my prison." You respect it. You bow to it, but you never actually put it in the lock and turn it to let yourself out of the prison cell. And so I've always felt that was a brilliant analogy, a brilliant simile that he uses, that we can relate to our form, the monastic the structures of our life, the robes, the routines we have, the Vinaya discipline, the traditions, and and say the rituals that we have, that we can relate to those in exactly the same way, that we respect them, we love them, we honor them, but we don't actually use them to put it in the lock and turn the key to free the heart from the prisons of greed, hatred, and delusion. And so that I feel that this is a very sort of helpful principle to really take to heart, to get a sense of how you can both be completely sincere and committed to using the forms and structures, the traditions and the discipline of our way of life, but yet be seeing it as a vehicle, as a means to an end, rather than an end in itself, or like using the classic image from the suttas, where the Buddha says the Dhamma is like a raft that you use if you're on the dangerous side of the river, where there's all kinds of difficulty and danger and problems, and you can gather some sticks and some vines and bind them together and then make a raft and then paddle across the stream and get to the other shore where there's safety and security. That once you've reached the other shore, then the raft has indeed been extremely helpful. That's how you got across the river from the dangerous side to the safe side. But once you've reached the safe shore, you don't then put the raft on your shoulder and think, oh, this has been so helpful to me, this has been so precious, so valuable, I'll carry it with me wherever I go. So no, having got to the safe shore, you put the raft down and you go your way. And so he said that's exactly how we should relate to the Dhamma teachings. So that we use them as a raft, as a vehicle, rather than as something to cling to and carry around, and then they become a burden. So that is I think a very clearly say described theme here. Any questions, thoughts? Venerable Mnunyo.
Yeah, I was just curious about the early days in Chithurst. Was Luang Por Sumedho also teaching Vinaya classes during Vasa, or anybody else? And which material were you using? Because there was no BMC in those days. So, I mean,
let me think. Let's see, 1980, 81. It would probably have been Ajahn Anando doing the Vinaya readings. We had the Vinaya Mukha, which was published by the Mahamakut Press, Bhavaniwait, Vinaya Mukh, Volume 1, Volume 2. So that was the main text in English as a Vinaya commentary. We also had I.B. Horner's translations of the Vinaya Pitaka. But really, the textbook that we used was the Vinaya Mukha that came from Mahamakut. And that was... they're both fairly small books, and much less comprehensive than the Buddhist monastic code, but that was pretty much the resource. But then also a few of the senior monks, like Ajahn Anando and Ajahn Sumedho, who were around. I think Ajahn Viradhamma was already, he was away at Harnham or down in Devon. He hadn't arrived by then. That would have been 81. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the nuns sat in on those as well, didn't you? Mm-hmm. So so that was the resource. And then also the people like Ajahn Tiradhammo, Ajahn Anando, Ajahn Sumedho, they would have had the memories of the long Vinaya readings in Thai language from what's called the Pupasika Vanana. There's no English translation of that, but that's hyper detailed. That makes the BMC look like a kind of a one-page summary. You know, so it's. Yeah, he had all handwritten notes on all of the Patimokkha. So we used to use that quite a lot. I think we've got copies of that are still all in our archives. Yes. One of the this comment that Luang Por makes, some monks play the standard theme over and over again. That it brought to mind that it's one of the stories in the Vinayas. This monk called Venerable Chulapantaka used to be given he used to have the job of doing the exhortation for the nuns every fortnight, and he just used to repeat this same short verse every time he went over to teach the nuns. And then it's one of those sort of funny incidents in the Pali humor. It's not kind of like rib breaking, roll on the floor laughing, but it's somewhat whimsical. So the nuns start to grumble and spread it about. Oh, Venerable Chulapantaka, every time he comes, he just says the same thing. This one short verse, he just repeats the same thing every time he comes. Why can't we have a monk who's an accomplished teacher like Venerable Ananda or Venerable Sariputta, who gives extensive Dhamma teachings? So word of this got back to the Venerable Chulapantaka, and the next time he came to do his exhortation, he rose up into the air. He delivered it from flying in the air. And that had an effect, so that the grumbles stopped, because it was they realized, oh, he's not just repeating the same thing because he doesn't know any better, or he's bored with this, or he's incompetent. He actually is a very competent person. So delivering a Dhamma talk, and I think he repeated the same verse but sort of expanded on it a bit, but also it was delivered from flying in the air, so that got everyone's attention, as it would. Anyway, so I'll finish the last part of this chapter here. And any other questions on that? Oh yes, Gaspar, before we go on.
Thank you, Ajahn. So I've been reflecting a lot about the notion of wisdom, and I particularly appreciate the comment where Ajahn Sumedho is sort of suggesting wisdom as a sort of an antidote towards conditioning. And having had the previous conversation about dissecting sort of the human body, or the physical sort of elements of our existence, I'm wondering whether we can sort of try to dissect or go into the anatomy of wisdom, sort of to speak, or maybe better to say, in line with the book that we are sort of contemplating, what would be the seeds of wisdom, or what would be the anatomy of wisdom? Thank you.
What is the anatomy of wisdom? Well, it's another one of those words that has a spectrum of meanings. So I don't know about your first language, but the wisdom in English, it often seems to imply knowing about, having information about something, or having an intellectual understanding. And so that it's not really accurately representing what a Buddhist meaning, the Buddhist meaning of the word panya is essentially embodying. There's a line from a T.S. Eliot poem, where is the wisdom that is lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge that is lost in information? So often we tend to think of wisdom as being the information, or the intellectual knowledge, or the way that the thinking mind can put things together and draw a pattern, can see the relationships between things. But in Buddhist terminology, the real anatomy of wisdom at its deepest level is the quality of awareness itself. It's not knowing about, but rather it's the quality of knowing itself, the quality of awareness. So certainly the aspects of intelligence, pattern recognition, seeing the relationship of cause and effect, and interrelationship of different aspects of experience, that's an outcome of wisdom. but the essence, or the real sort of at a cellular level, then the heart of wisdom is a quality of awakened awareness itself. So it's a non-verbal, non-conceptual quality that is what makes it panya, or a liberating quality. And so that if information and then understanding, if that is connected to that quality of awareness, then it's often very, very useful, very, very beneficial, and an incredibly helpful tool. If that knowledge, that intellectual patterning and seeing how things fit together, if that isn't connected with awareness and that quality of attunement to reality, to the experience of the present, then it very easily comes adrift, and then you can get that kind of the intellectualism that becomes an effective wall or against reality, or you can create a seamless argument for defending your own opinions, or attacking somebody else, or justifying your own fears or aversions or desires and such like. And so that's one of the, like I was saying earlier, it's one of the downsides of having a lot of intelligence, that it can be a real obstacle, because you can make like Luang Por was saying earlier on, so, there's always a good reason for an action. There are good reasons for breaking all the rules, as far as I can see, and he's talked about that many times in Dhamma, in his Dhamma teachings. So he says, my thinking mind can come up with all kinds of good reasons to break all of the precepts, perfectly justifiable reasons. But so that's where it becomes problematic. So if you just use the thinking mind and you come up with a case for that, then it's losing its context. Do you understand what I mean? It's losing its connection with reality, and so that there's maybe a little bit of a tangential point, but there's in a very wonderful little book called Buddhist Economics by Venerable Payutto, Bhikkhu Payutto. He makes a point how, when he's talking about what is meant by Buddhist economics rather than classical economics, he said in classical economics, $10 worth of whiskey and $10 worth of noodles have the same value. Buddhist economics, $10 worth of whiskey has a very different and an inferior value to $10 of noodles, because the impact of people consuming whiskey, there's a detriment in terms of relationships, of lifestyle, of physical health, and so on. And so that in a way, that quality of awareness and attunement of the citta to reality, to Dhamma, that's what helps the bigger picture to be sort of taken into account. That it's not just seeing things in a superficial way. Or maybe I'll finish there. There's a little bit more of this section, and then the next one is very, very short, but I'll just leave those till tomorrow, since it's just coming up to 7 o'clock. So, any other questions? Oh, Anagarika Evgenia.
To ask about this panya kind of living thing that earlier there was discussion about Krishnamurti's teachings, and he often says that there is no way like to find the truth. It's a living thing. That it's the truth is a living thing. Mm-hmm. So if you practice to gain some experience, that there is some goal, like kind of static thing that you can attain, that it's misunderstanding the practice. So that the truth is a living thing, and kind of, as I understand him, there is no point of grasping any kind of experience because each moment is fresh and constantly changing. So in terms of Panya, what you said, it seems kind of very similar. So I was wondering if you can expand a little bit also on the practice, because quite often mind can become kind of mechanical or to attach to some kind of experience that it had, and something worked, so I can apply it again, and next time it's completely different. So according to Krishnamurti, you leave behind every experience constantly, so you don't grab to anything that worked or like go afresh into each moment. If you can expand a little bit on this in the practice.
Yes, I would agree with that, but it's rather like Rachmaninoff sitting down at the piano and saying, it goes like this. And then everyone who's listening is like, how did he do that? So Krishnamurti, in a way that, if I'm understanding what you were saying, that Krishnamurti is saying that having the mind being fresh to each moment, yes, if you're a Rachmaninoff of spiritual of spiritual skill, because what we experience is that you can't just decide, I'm not going to ever feel jealousy or fear, I'm not going to get angry or lustful, I'm not going to be lazy ever again. You can't. The mind that decides is not working for the same outfit as the one that's carrying the momentum of those habits forward. So that it's not so much that what Krishnamurti is saying is a bad idea. It's just that what most human beings are working with is the momentum of conditioning. The habits that are here of longing for what we haven't got, or trying to get rid of the things that we don't want, or being restless, or feeling the promise of that thing over there, which is much more interesting and real than what's here. That you can't, as a human being, you can't just switch those off. You can say, okay, anger is a bad thing. From today on, I'll never get angry ever again. That's a beautiful thought. But the habits of getting angry are driven by forces that don't respond to that kind of an intention. The intention can be there, but it can't have that kind of a depth of an effect. If someone has extraordinary paramita, of great spiritual skill, someone like Krishnamurti, who's an extraordinary, highly developed mind and of spiritual qualities, then that sense of just being fresh to the moment, then a lot of the conditioning from the past is just not having any impact, or is just not there, so that the mind can attune perfectly to the fullness of reality of Dhamma here and now. What's there to get? What's there to get rid of? You are the ultimate reality. Fine. That's true already, I would say, but because of I think I'm a person, I think I'm a man, I think I like this, I don't like that, I'm comfortable with this, I'm uncomfortable with that, this is beautiful, that's ugly. Those the momentum, or the kind of the power or the force of habit has its effect upon the mind, and you can't just snap your fingers and make it go away. So a lot of the practice is letting go of that conditioning that's there. And I think as Luang Por made a point early on in the reading, we are, where was it? One cannot help the conditions that are present that makes the delusion arise in one's mind. You can't undo the causes that have already happened in the past. If the causes for Anagarika Evgenia to be lazy, or to be excited, or to be worried, if those causes have been created, you can't undo the causes, but you can you can meet the results of those causes for anxiety or excitement or laziness. They can be met here in the present moment, but they've already been caused. It's like the rain has fallen from the sky. It's got to land. It's like it's out of the clouds. It's coming down. It's going to hit the ground. Something's going to happen to that moisture. It's already dropping, so it's got to land somewhere. So if the causes for fear or anger or lust or jealousy and opinionatedness or so on, if they've already been caused, then what we're practicing with is meeting the effects of those causes here in the present. So we're feeling, just as Luang Por describes it, we're feeling those waves of conditioning, of jealousy, of fear, and so on. But the way that the mind receives those and knows those in the present, that's our practice. And the degree to which that receiving can be wholesome and skillful and also free of self-view, that plants the causes for clarity and for freedom to ripen in the future. So that I would say that what Krishnamurti is saying is about the essence of wisdom is the heart awakening to reality, to Dhamma, here and now. But it's the things that obstruct that are already sort of having their influence. You can't just ignore them or pretend that they're not there. Or like I was mentioning the other day, when Luang Por Sumedho was a student in Berkeley and trying to follow Krishnamurti's teachings and looking at a flower, say, right, it's a flower. It's just a flower. It's not. I'm not having any kind of transcendent experience here. It's just I'm just sitting on the grass looking at this flower. It's because I would say that when we do that and that kind of thing happens, then it's the momentum of our habits is what's clouding the picture, distorting the picture. So much of our practice is skillfully receiving the effects of those habits that have already been caused, and then the way that those are worked with, and the degree to which those that is in tune, that is based on mindfulness and wisdom, and is free of self-view, then you're doing everything that can be done in order to clarify that vision. That makes sense. I'm aware that it's 6 minutes past 7 already, but you can finish with something, but I don't want to start another question. If you have another comment to make. Yeah.
Probably the idea was not to create a new habit when this old habit landed.
Yeah.
Not to create a habit, okay, I do it with this practice and it becomes kind of mechanical. So to be more fresh, to really understand what's going on, and maybe like this awareness could be even enough without any kind of method.
Yeah, that's it. You're receiving the results of old habits without creating new habits. That's what they call the karma that leads to the end of karma. It's a good point to end on, so I'll finish there.